Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Auburn Undercover Podcast, live on the 24/7 Sports Network. Here with Jason Caldwell. Jason, it's good to be back. I don't think we've had a show since signing day. Obviously, after signing day, we had the holidays, and then I went out to Orlando. You went up to Nashville. Then we met up and went out to San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. So we've been all over the place. And then I was sick coming back from San Antonio. So now we're finally back. Duke should be joining us hopefully tonight at some point as well. But we have plenty of stuff to talk about after they had a mini junior day. They weren't calling it a junior day, but there were 15 guys on campus this weekend, including a preferred walk-on running back and a transfer guy, and then 13 2025 guys. So kind of an elite event, I guess you could call it. I don't know what you want to call it, but it was good. And then the news of Monday was that Auburn picked up that transfer, Jaron Thompson, who from the minute that he stepped on Texas's campus 4 years ago was a contributor. He played on that defense, started on that defense for a good little bit there. Has been really, really productive at the safety position. And after Jalen Simpson and Zion Puckett depart, Auburn brings in Jaron Thompson through the transfer portal here on Monday.
Yeah, veteran guy, a guy that was a top 200 player coming out of high school out of Lufkin, Texas, and obviously a guy that's played a lot of football. And you think about Auburn, think about needs, and kind of how this roster is going to fit together. Obviously, with Keontae Scott coming back, Kayan Lee coming back, you got some guys that have played. Obviously, Keontae Scott's played a lot of football, and you think about, okay, corner's probably a little easier to kind of edge into and ease into than the safety spot because of all the things that are required. You think about a guy that's played so much football, and you think about, obviously Donovan Kaufman's a guy that's back. How does he fit into kind of this scheme? What will it be? That's still waiting on some of those things as well. But Jaron Thompson's a guy that gives you a ton of experience, a guy that's played a lot of football, is a good combination safety. He's not a true downhill 220-pound safety, but he's also not a 185-pound cover guy either. He's a guy that can do a lot of different things. He's been really productive. So I think it's an important player from experience standpoint and gives you another one of those guys to kind of slide into that role for this Auburn secondary in 2024.
Yes, you've got him. He is your 8th portal pickup, I believe, because Percy Lewis was number 7, if I remember correctly. We haven't even talked about him. We haven't talked about a good bit of the transfer guys, but
Right.
Percy Lewis was a really quality pickup to shore up that offensive line. The former Mississippi State offensive tackle. Nathan covered that one while we were out in San Antonio. He had that one locked up. So Auburn has 8 through the portal. Still keeping our eyes on really only one name as of right now, and that's Antonio Kite, the former defensive back out of Alabama. Charles Kelly recruited him to Alabama. Obviously, Charles Kelly is now back home at Auburn. And so because of that, we're keeping an eye on Antonio Kite. He entered the portal a couple of days ago. So he could be maybe number 9 as Auburn is coming up on that 85 scholarship limit. And you also have to save space for potentially Ryan Williams. Dimitri Nicholas still hasn't signed as well. We'll see what happens there. And then the other thing is, after the spring, there will be more attrition as well. We're going to welcome in Dukes as well. Dukes, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, man?
Not much. How about you?
Just kind of going over some of the stuff that Auburn. Man, what a week in Auburn, right?
Yeah, it's crazy everywhere. I talk to folks that cover other schools, and everybody's dealing with it in some form or fashion. And you kind of feel like it because it's us and it's close to home. It feels crazy, and then you think about everybody. Everybody's dealing with this, and then you think about when Nick Saban, that everything that's happened because of that. Just okay, well, that's 30 days. Well, then Washington has 30 days. Now Arizona has 30 days. And so you got all these things. Jim Harbaugh, I would expect to be, Christian's next head coach of the LA Chargers or somewhere along the line. Then you'll have 30 days for a Michigan roster. And it is the unfairness, but the absolute insanity of this calendar now that we have. And it's crazy because, we were told and thought at one time that, Wednesday, that's kind of the day for Auburn. You got to get everybody in by the 17th. And now we're like, no, it can go a little bit later than that. And so I don't know that there's an actual date for for guys to get into school now. It's going to be much later than Wednesday, and so there's still this thing's going to carry on for a little while.
Yeah, I think the last day is whatever the drop date is. I think it's something like that. Like, Christian, you've been in school way more recently than me.
Technically.
when like, so what was it like? What was the final drop date? Was it 10 days after the start?
So looking at the class calendar right now, the 15th class day, which is January 31st, is the last day to drop a course.
It's so not far from that. As long as you can get into school and be registered, it's not far from that date.
It says 17th is the last day to add a course, but I think that's for people who have already enrolled. And maybe I think it's going to be more than the 17th. I don't know what they're going to have some other time. I would guess at least another week or so from that. So it's crazy. But you start looking at Chris. You mentioned Percy Lewis, and we need to give him some love because that's an important part of this one for Auburn. We've been talking about since they walked off the field in Nashville, trying to find an offensive tackle so Dylan Wade can move inside. And it's funny because ran into Dylan Wade the other day, and I said, "You do know you scared everyone to death with your peace sign?" And he just started laughing. He goes, "Yeah, man, I was just talking about leaving Houston and heading back to Auburn." I said, "Well, you scared everybody from fans to coaches probably and teammates." And he's like, "No, I was just talking about I was coming back to school and leaving Houston." But I think he's a guy that benefits as much as anyone moving inside the guard. And this is a Kendall Simmons situation. Kendall Simmons, guy that had to play tackle when he got to Auburn, moved inside the guard, gets drafted, goes to Steelers, and has an NFL career. The same situation. I think Dylan Wade's a guy that'll excel at guard. And NFL teams are going to go, "Hey, can you snap the football? Because if you can, you might play center." And he has the look of and build and frame of the kids the twins that played at Florida. That one of them was a starting center for the Steelers. I just went blank with the play with
Pouncey.
That's who he reminds me of from a frame standpoint. But you look at all of a sudden at Auburn's offensive tackles, and you look at Percy Lewis, a guy that weighed 380, 390 pounds a few years ago, and now it's a guy that's 340 and looks really good. You say, okay, that guy plays left tackle. And you got Tyler Johnson, who they feel really good about. Say, okay, now you got another year to get seasoning and play and get some. Look at right tackle, and obviously Too Tall is back, and you got junior college edition there, and then we laid eyes on Faber Edwin the other day, and he's almost 320 pounds. I mean, it does not look like the same kid. I mean, he has already gotten so much bigger. So you look at Auburn's offensive tackles now, and all of a sudden you go 6'7", 320, 6'5", 320, 6'7", 315, 6'8", 345, and athletic and big guys, and how quickly things have changed for that group in just a matter of moments. Unbelievable job that they've done in rebuilding this offensive line.
Yeah, well, I mean, that leads us perfectly into the first question that was in the chat. Someone was asking about Dontrell Glover, the Alabama commit from Langston Hughes. That's him next to Jake Thornton on the left side in the picture. Tavares Dice on the right side. The one on the far left is their other teammate at Langston Hughes. Cam is his first name. Dukes, help me out. I can't remember his last name off the top of my head. Cam something.
Yeah. Man, I thought that was Amir, but it could be somebody different.
Yeah, it was Cam. We looked him up Saturday, and I'll look him up, and I can't remember who.
Okay.
Oh, but he plays guard, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's the other guard. I don't know him.
Cam Williams.
Yeah, he came from South. He came from South Georgia. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying, and Cam Williams, a guy that's probably not. I mean, not going to be an Auburn guy, but he came along with it. He's a guy that's good enough to play college football, but I mean, he's listed at 6'3", 290 or so. He's probably 6'2", but it gives you an idea of the size of this Langston Hughes offensive line heading into next year. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
No, absolutely. There's a guy who didn't come, Caleb Ash, 6'6", 6'7", 280, 290. I think Arizona State just got involved. Auburn, I think, would be interested in a PWO type deal for him. But, but as far as the main two that we're talking about, Dontrell Glover, and Tavares Dice. Man, Donnie sent me a text. He said, "Still feels like home." And he posted a picture, and the song behind the picture is switched up, and the Alabama fans go crazy. It's like, "Oh, you're leaving too soon." And I think he's going to be a guy. They're starting to realize that they want to play together, Donnie and Dice. And I think that Donnie is somebody who's a true guard. He used to play offensive tackle. If you see him now, he's filled out a lot from the last time you saw him when he was coming up as a 10th grader. Now he's starting to look like a mauler. I don't think I've seen a offensive lineman as nasty as him at that age when it comes to just being a physical, aggressive, block finishing type guy. I think Auburn has a great shot. He's always liked Auburn. He was the youngest one when those Langston Hughes guys used to come with Air and Bo Hughley and Terrence Love and all of those guys. He was the baby of the group. Now it's his turn. He's visited Auburn almost 10 times. And I think he's visited Auburn more than he's visited Alabama. Had to get over last year where he didn't get nobody talked to him really at the 8A game. And I think from what I heard, Coach Thornton was really, really adamant about saying, "Hey, you're a guy that we want. You've hit the size requirement that we want for our guards. We just wanted to know, how that was going to work." And so, yeah, I think he's going to be a guy that absolutely Auburn is going to set their targets on, as somebody on the inside, on the interior. You think about a guy his size who can come out and pull. On the other side, having maybe like a DeAndre Carter at that side. So when you think about the way that Auburn is constructing their offensive line with those long, lengthy, pass protecting type offensive tackles, and you go into your guards and you get into the 6'3", 6'4" Mauler range, and you look at what Georgia's bringing in on the defensive line, you look at what Alabama's bringing in on the defensive line, you can compete. And that's somewhere that we haven't been able to compete, or Auburn hasn't been able to compete as much as they've wanted to previously. So, yeah, definitely get involved in the 25 class early is super important, and you'll see more and more guys coming in the next coming weeks.
Well, and Dukes, I don't know if you saw the news, but our Bama 247 guy Brett Greenberg reported about an hour ago or so that Donnie actually told him he was decommitting from Alabama.
He did.
Now Donnie hasn't posted anything on social media about that, but that was what he told Brett Greenberg, and Brett reported it. So that, look, even if it hasn't gone official quite yet, it's definitely kind of been trending that direction as the staff overturns in Alabama, which I must say, it's nice to not be covering a coaching change in the state of Alabama this time around.
Hey, man. Donnie said oh, yeah, okay. Well, if Donnie said that, then you can almost – I would be looking at both of those guys to commit, because I got the same text from both of them. And I know they want to play together at this point. They've been able to solidify that side of the offensive line at Langston Hughes for the past year. If you watch them against Carrollton, you watch them when they had those games that were public, they absolutely mauled people together. So I think that would be a huge pickup for Auburn if they were able to garner those commitments. There was a recruit that I was talking about that was close to committing about a month and a half ago. It was absolutely Tavares Dice. And I talk to these kids these recruits pretty frequently. So, yeah, I did not know that. I have been watching the NFL, so no, that's yeah.
You know what? And it's we just talked about offensive line, and we got a lot to talk about still with some of the guys, and we can talk about some of the all-star guys we saw. But I think there's a opportunity now for Auburn to do something that they haven't done on the offensive line probably since the days of Ryan Pugh and Lee Zimba and that group that were part of a national championship. It's been that long since you saw Auburn sign 5 or 6 high school offensive linemen that had a chance to come in and do. That's the opportunity they have right now. Spencer Dolan's already committed. Christian, he was in this past weekend. Mal Waldrop right there was in this past weekend. We just mentioned the 2 kids from Langston Hughes.
Micah DuBose, Braden Jacobs.
Micah DuBose, Braden Jacobs, the son of Brandon Jacobs.
Cortez Smith from Parkview.
Carday Smith from down in Mobile. Auburn has a legit opportunity to go out and get 5 or 6 elite offensive linemen in a class. All
in their bubble too.
Yes, and that's the thing, and it's kind of what we talked about some in this past class. Going, look, they don't want to reach in 2024 because there's so many good players in this class, and they don't have to go very far to get them. And so you got guys that have been on campus. You can get on campus and get back on campus. And it's going to be one of the things that we saw last year, skill guys, skill guys, skill guys. Now, you always got to get them. But I think offensive line, running back this year, quarterback's always going to be there.
D-line.
But I think it's going to be line of scrimmage heavy in this class and trying to build it. In addition to, like this year, they still had to go portal to kind of get you through the gaps. Now you go, hey, look, we want to be high school heavy and build those guys for the future, and you got an opportunity to do that.
Jason, you got a chance to talk with Mal, and if you missed that story, it's up on auburnundercover.com. It was up yesterday, but just a quick recap, quick notes. He said that Auburn was really 1 or 2 in his recruitment right now, and he's going to go see Clemson at the end of the month, and it seems like it's really down to those two, and it might be not long after that.
Yeah, I think it's those 2 schools. I really do. Alabama background for Mal from a family standpoint, but Auburn and Clemson are the 2 schools that kind of have kind of tied in and zeroed in there. Guy that plays left tackle at Central Phoenix City could be a guy that slides inside the guard eventually. Good enough to probably play right tackle if you wanted him to, but just continues to develop. He was so much better. Chris, we saw him day one after moving from a small private school in Georgia to Central Phoenix City, and all of a sudden you got a bunch of guys over here that look a lot different than the guys you played before. From day one, we saw him to the end of the year was so much better, and now he's got an opportunity to take the next step too. But yeah, I think it's an Auburn-Clemson battle for him, and I don't expect it to be much longer. I would guess maybe the next month or 2, sometime this spring. I would imagine that he will make a decision.
Hit some of the questions here from the chat. One from Steven, D-line portal possibilities. No one that we know of right now. You've already got Engage Keys. You got Trill Carter from Texas as well. Dimitri Nicholas is obviously committed but not signed in the 2024 class. Still remains to be seen what happens with him in terms of whether or not Auburn ends up deciding to sign him or not. But if you're Auburn, you see who enters the portal from some of these other schools with coaching changes, maybe try and add some of those. And I think you're fine waiting until the spring a little bit. D-line is a very easy plug-and-play spot in terms of, I mean, you got Jalen McLeod last year. That's the edge, obviously, but you could go out and get a D-lineman in the post-spring portal and feel pretty comfortable about it as well. Question here from Will asking about Will Rogers. Could we land Will Rogers? Haven't heard anything about it. I don't think that's.
Yeah, I don't feel like that would be a possibility. Now, you never say never, but it doesn't feel like that's one that Auburn would pursue at this moment. I think they feel like, hey, we got a guy right now in Peyton Thorne that gives you what Will Rogers gives you. Obviously, different offense, but Will Rogers is a guy that coming back off an injury did not look the same last year at Mississippi State. Obviously, it's a different offense, but it's a similar offense to what Auburn will be playing, and it wasn't a great fit. Will Rogers, a guy that played air raid growing up, played air raid at Mississippi State, and did not look to be the same guy when they went into a more traditional style offense. So I don't expect that one to happen. Like I said, never say never, but right now I don't think so.
I'm going to let y'all attack this one. Question from Kyle, of course, on Ryan Williams, asking if Auburn is the favorite. The only thing I'll say right now is that I think as of January 15th, at the time of recording this, I think Auburn has a slight lead, but we'll see what happens. He visited Texas A&M. He's going to go see LSU this week. He's going to go see Bama this weekend. He's still going to go see Texas, and then Auburn gets the last visit. And as of right now, I think Auburn leads, but I think there's still light years to go in this recruitment.
That's a long way. That's a long way from now to February 9th, and a lot of schools to traverse between now and then if you're Auburn. I think the greatest thing Auburn has going for it right now is the other 4 guys already on campus. Or, excuse me, 4 guys already signed, 2 already on campus, 2 coming. Those guys having bonded together to recruit, and really this entire class, and heck, half the roster recruiting Ryan Williams. I think that love is important, but it's going to be, like I said, I think it's a long way to go between now and February 9th. But I still felt like Auburn was right there, and I think that'll be the case.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down. I think once this coaching carousel stops and you find out who's going to be where, I think then you'll also kind of see Ryan kind of lean into his decision a little bit more. Like, I'm not sure if T-Rob actually said he's not going back to Alabama after Georgia, but I would think that him being his lead recruiter at Alabama, he probably would try to get Georgia involved if that hasn't happened already. You got Texas A&M. Excuse me. How does that look if Texas A&M were to get a Zach Etheridge? Like if something like that were to happen, like how does that Texas A&M look different? What happens at Alabama? What do they do at wide receiver? How does he mesh with their? You're already bringing in a offensive coordinator from the West Coast. You know they're going to go get somebody who's familiar with the lay of the land. What if Damian Craig ends up at Alabama? Who knows, right? So people that have those relationships with Ryan previously, where they end up, I'm pretty sure is going to have some type of impact on his recruitment. So right now, probably Auburn has the most ability when it comes to the coach that's been recruiting him in the same position as the wide receiver coach has, and the guy who's going to be calling it is already in place, which is Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze has been recruiting him a very long time. Texas A&M, Elko, Kalen DeBoer, Alabama. A lot of uncertainty around LSU. If Harbaugh gets that NFL job, Brian Kelly will probably be the lead guy that they will be looking to hire. So just a lot of uncertainty in the coaching realm. So I think that's going to have a huge impact on Ryan's final decision.
Yeah, I mean, Dukes, you brought it up. I think if you're an Auburn fan, you at least feel good that you're the school in the spot that has some of the most stability. Texas, maybe as well. Texas is the school that, as of right now, I'm viewing as the biggest competitor for Auburn. It can change a lot, but I think Texas with Steve Sarkisian, with his quarterback, KJ Lacey, committed there in the 2025 class, I think Texas is the biggest competition. But like I said, things can change quite a bit. Question from Jonathan, OC and DC updates. Jason, you wrote about this a little bit earlier today in your Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah. I still feel like Auburn is in pursuit of Derek Nix. I don't think that's changed. These things take a while, and we'll see if that winds up happening and he does come on. One thing we know that Hugh Freeze is going to be the guy that calls the plays. He's going to be, a guy that is heavily involved in the offense, and I think more consistently than he was this season. I think that is the first and foremost thing we know. I think we feel pretty certain that Ken Austin is going to be on the field as Auburn's quarterback coach at a minimum. A guy that has, and when you say moving on the field, folks might go, well, an analyst, how you moving it? This is a very, very similar situation. Now, he's not as known as, a Steve Sarkisian or these guys that have done those things before. But this guy that has been an OC and a head coach in the CFL, he's been an OC in the Southeastern Conference. This guy has a strong quarterback history and offensive history. So it's a guy that Hugh Freeze trusts. So I think Ken Austin's going to be there. We'll see about Derek Nix. I still think that one is in play. And then, defensively, we've heard a lot of different things. We've heard Chris Kiffin. We've heard that name. Chris Kiffin, obviously, the Houston Texans will be playing again. Defensive line coach there. He was with Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss as a defensive line coach and a defensive recruiting coordinator. He was really involved in guys like Robert Kimdichie and some of those other guys that really turned Ole Miss around from a defensive standpoint during that Hugh Freeze era. That's a guy I think still to pay attention to. But I think there's some guys out there that maybe are a little bit under the radar that are quietly being looked at. We've heard, Deeks mentioned it, the carousel impacts everybody. And it impacts everybody from multiple schools all over, because you start to go, okay, if you're at another school and you don't want people to know that you're interviewing because it impacts you at your current school, and so you want to be as quiet as possible. Usually when it gets out, there's one of two reasons. Either that's who it is, or hey, I'm going to get a bump at my current school because they really want to keep me, and those kind of things. It's been pretty quiet on this end, which makes me think there's a couple of guys out there that are seriously considering this one they're looking at. So I think there's going to be a name or two pop up, but I think it's going to be this week. I would expect something to happen from both those coordinator sides sometime this week. Today was a holiday, so that kind of slows it down a little bit from an administrative standpoint. But I wouldn't be surprised to see things start to kick into a little bit higher gear tomorrow.
I'll hit this question, then we can touch on some of the other 25s that were on campus. How are you feeling about Alvin Henderson after losing Caddy? Wish he had visited with the other 2025 prospects. Alvin Henderson visited Georgia this weekend. I think he's also going to Penn State and Miami this month as well. Look, to answer that question, I talked to Alvin for a little bit and had a story up on auburnundercover.com. Until Auburn gets a running back coach in place, I can't really tell you, because that guy's going to have his own targets. Feels like Alvin Henderson will still be a target for Auburn. Hugh Freeze has already invested time in this recruitment. I'd be willing to bet Alvin Henderson has talked with Hugh Freeze since Cadillac has left. I talked with Alvin 10 minutes after the Cadillac news came out. But until a new running back coach is in place, not really going to be entirely sure there. But we do know Alvin Henderson likes Auburn quite a bit, just as Auburn as well. People were asking about the other 2025s that are on campus, so we've got a couple more to hit on here. Let's start here. We'll talk about wide receivers. Derek Smith, he was back on campus. Dukes and Jason, I don't think it's a stretch to say this is Auburn's number one target as of right now in 2025 at wide receiver. Derek Smith, he said afterwards that he was talking with Coach Marcus, and Coach Marcus was saying he wants him, and he wants him really badly. And we've gotten to see him play, and it's obvious why Auburn wants him pretty badly.
Yeah, he's a freak show from an athletic standpoint. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Keontae Scott athletically, because Keontae Scott's a guy that you feel like he could probably play 5 different positions. He could probably play wide receiver. It could do. Derek Smith's the same thing. You watch play wide receiver and you go, well, he can play running back, probably play quarterback. This guy, Christian, I want you to find his stats to give people an idea. But he was a safety as a freshman and sophomore. Last year we saw him and he was playing more of that nickel outside linebacker and rushing the passer. It's just unbelievable, and he has done it everywhere. And a guy that I think when he gets to college and he's just a wide receiver and he's just a football player, then you see him, I think, take some incredible strides.
Here's his stats, and this is a mouthful. In the last 3 seasons in high school football for him, 4,075 receiving yards and 30 receiving touchdowns. He ran for over 1,000 yards as a sophomore and junior, with 17 rushing touchdowns combined between those 2 years. Defensively, he has 268 tackles, 29 tackles for loss, 16 sacks, 21 interceptions, and 14 pass breakups. Over 3 years. It's one of the most insane stat lines you'll see in terms of, Jason, we saw him play. He never left the field until the game was out of hand there in the fourth quarter. And he was still moving at an incredibly high rate.
Yep. No, he's got, outstanding basketball player. His brother, twin brother, is a big time basketball player, 6'6", but plays wide receiver. I think he'll end up being a hybrid tight end playing football on the next level. Eric Smith. So it's a really important guy in my opinion. I think a guy that has so much upside. It's a Malcolm Simmons type situation a little bit, where you just watch him and go, man, when everything falls into place and he's able to really focus on this, it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and he said Auburn was top 2 for him. I think personally Auburn is 1 right now, but I think there's still a ways to go in his recruitment. I don't think it's even close to being finished quite yet, but I do think Auburn sits in a very good spot. And if Marcus Davis puts a priority on a guy, based on the 2024 class, you probably feel pretty good about Marcus Davis landing that guy. Speaking of guys that on Auburn staff that recruit really, really well, Josh Aldridge. And he's put a lot of emphasis on Eric Winters, who is also back on campus this weekend. Dukes, the enterprise linebacker. I think he's like the number 34 player in the country, something like that. He's top 40. I know that for sure. And he said it's really down to Auburn and Georgia. He's going to visit Georgia, I believe, February 3rd, that Saturday. And then he wants to have a decision sometime early this spring. So he's another February decision candidate, and this would be another huge pickup for the 2025 class, Dukes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at Jaden Perlotti, Eric Winters, you look at that 25 class where Auburn is going head-to-head against Georgia in multiple situations, they're going to win one. And I don't know which one it'll be. Could they win both possibly? But I don't think these two guys go to the same school. They're really similar in the way they play. The athleticism just pops off the tape when you go watch them. I'm excited to see Winters at the UA camp, to see him really like rev it up and just go against some of the top competition in the pass rush. That's one thing I also wanted to see is, can he get to the quarterback? Because when you watch him in high school, he can do whatever he wants to do on the field. Is he going to be able to develop a secondary move to get to the quarterback? But as far as in pass coverage, he's exactly what you want. He's somebody that true 3-down linebacker. You can leave him on the field. He can cover a wheel. He can carry the wheel for you just to get to the second level if you're playing zone. So I think he's a really important pickup, especially with the way Auburn needs to put that fence back around Alabama. Whereas previously Auburn would dip into so many states because what was that? What class was that? Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, out of the top 14 players in Alabama, Auburn got 2 out of 14. Like, that can't happen again. And so this is how you avoid that. You get in on guys early and you stay consistent. And I think Eric Winters is a guy. If I had to pick between Auburn and Georgia, today I would go Auburn.
Yeah, I have a crystal ball in for Auburn here. I just think this is a guy that Josh Aldridge is going to get. I think they put in a ton of work here, so I think they're going to get him. But we'll see how things go over the next month. And then the last one is a big collection of guys. A lot of them already committed. Left to right in this picture, you've got Malik Autry, who is Auburn's first 25 commit. You have CJ May, the Notre Dame edge commit from Highland Home, defensive line coach Jeremy Garrett there. And then to his right, you have Antonio Coleman, who recently flipped from Alabama to Auburn, Kalen Edwards from Tennessee, who is committed to Auburn, and then Zion Grady, the 5-star edge, also now at Enterprise, teammates with Eric Winters now, who is committed to Alabama, but he was on campus this weekend. Jason and Dukes, I want you all to both kind of touch on this. The D-line class in general, we touched on the line of scrimmage earlier and it being big for Auburn in 2025. Half of Auburn's 8 commitments are D-line right now. The only D-line commit that wasn't on campus this weekend was Jordan Crawford. And he was supposed to visit, but he decided to wait until his teammate Naeem Offord, the 5-star cornerback, could visit with him as well. So he'll be down here soon as well. But you've really got your 25 D-line class almost set. You had Andrew Maddox from Oak Grove High School in for a visit. Kind of feels like he could be that 5th and final guy as Jeremy Garrett absolutely loads up. I mean, it's January 15th, and Jeremy Garrett has like one guy left on the board in terms of interior defensive linemen. That's crazy.
Yeah, and obviously you look in kind of the combination group here with Zion in there as a true pass rusher, a guy that's more of a jack linebacker. But this is a group that CJ May, I think, is going to be he's probably more of a jack right now, but is a big physical kid committed to Notre Dame. This is a group that has a bunch of big dudes in it. This reminds me of watching what Alabama and Georgia have done multiple times in the last 15 years. Alabama 15 years, Georgia the last 7 or so years, going out and getting guys like this on defensive line. That's what this reminds me of, because that's where it starts. You can have all those skill guys you want to. You can have all those guys, but if you can't, and it's the important thing. Pass rush are great, and you've got to have them. But if you have interior guys that can create havoc, you don't have to have as many of those guys outside. Now, it's great if you do, but Georgia won multiple national championships and did not have an elite edge pass rusher. They had dudes in the middle that just created havoc all over the place. So that's what this group has the potential to be.
Yeah, I think just goes to show you what a change of philosophy can do. To be this far ahead on a 25 class, and yes, it's a long time. You gotta recruit them for another year. But even having guys in their head saying, I want to be a part of this early in the cycle, I think is an amazing job by Jeremy Garrett. And from everything I hear about Garrett, and even the times that I've spoken with him, he's the perfect fit for Auburn. A Mississippi guy. He can give you that down home talk. He relates to the culture. If you see it, I mean, you just look at the kids. I mean, the sunglasses, the retro vibe, he fits right in. Looks like a cool big brother or something. And I think that goes a long way when it comes to recruiting guys. And because whether people want to admit it or not, college football is changing by the day. And you have to have guys who are able to relate to 17 and 18-year-olds. I got a 17, 18-year-old niece right now, and I don't know what the heck she's thinking on a day-to-day basis. So I can only imagine, if you look at these guys, what Jeremy Garrett has to deal with in order to recruit them. And I think that it's amazing at the job that he's been able to do to kind of turn that over from what we've seen previously. Now, 2-3 years ago, when you looked at Auburn's defensive line class, you really didn't get your guys until almost a week or two before signing day. I mean, nobody was openly saying, hey, I want to be a part of this. And I think that Jeremy Garrett has done a really, really good job. And I think you can see the tides starting to turn in Auburn's favor when it comes to being an it, quote unquote, place.
I think we'll wrap it up here. Jason, I want you to touch on some of the basketball visitors, including Malik Thomas, I think his name is, who was on campus for an official visit. And we'll close it out there.
Yeah. Obviously, start with Malik, 5-star, one of the top 6 or 7 players in the country, and just an elite player. When you look at him, this is a guy that has offers from really all over the country. When you start talking about him, and looking at what he does, I mean, he's a scorer, can do everything that you need to do, and so I think he is a guy that is right there on Auburn's radar. I think when you start talking about what he brings to the table, guy from Pennsylvania, 6'4", 175, 180, but has offers from, every major school in the country. You start talking about, and who would have ever thought? And we're now where we're in this game. You look at his list of schools, and it's Auburn, Kentucky, UConn, Duke, Indiana, and who's who. That's incredible to think about. That's where Auburn is in terms of basketball. But I think Auburn has a shot. He has been, multiple times, was back on campus and for that official visit. So I think that's a good starting point there. Tyler Jackson is another 5-star. He's a point guard, plays at overtime elite with Auburn signee Ja'Kai Howard, both those guys were in for unofficial visits. And Ja'Kai is one of the most electric players in the country at 6'6", 175, 180 pounds. He said, hey, now I see I need to get bigger and more physical. And so I think that was probably the thing for him. But, he was in, and I think a really talented player. And obviously Tyler Jackson is a guy that has, he's got, a dozen or so offers. Has been to Auburn a few times, and I think is absolutely a player to watch when you start talking about, guys targets in this class. And so I think that's one of the guys that you pay attention to a little bit. But, there's an in-state kid that was in as well. Simon Walker is a 6'4", 6'5" guard that can play, a really good player. So they continue to get those guys on campus that are all big-time players. Simon Walker is a guy that played at Huntsville High School, is 22-1, 23-1, something like that. Got several guys. He averages 14, 15 a game, doesn't have to shoot it all the time, but it can score, can do a lot of different things. And so I think those are guys to watch. But Malik Thomas is one of the best of the best. And I think just watching them continue to get those guys on campus is a big deal. You got to have players. We just talked about it, and we've talked about it for years ad nauseum in football, and showing up in basketball too. The depth of roster, Auburn's roster this year, the depth of that roster, and having guys at every position that can play. And this is another group that came in this past weekend that obviously if Bruce Burke could get a couple of those guys to go along with what you have. The question is, you don't know what your roster looks like next year, but you start signing guys like that, and you feel pretty good about finding some pieces to put around them.
Hit this one from Red super quick. He was the first guy in the chat, so I want to make sure we get his question. What if Auburn flips KJ Lacey? Could that possibly help us get Ryan Williams? Absolutely would help with Ryan Williams. Will Auburn be able to do that in general? That's the question. Will Auburn be able to do that before February 9th? Seems like it's a little bit of a tight timeline there for Auburn to pull it off, but they have been working KJ Lacey pretty hard. He is not scheduled to visit to Auburn, but I would definitely anticipate him coming up that weekend that Ryan Williams is there, the weekend of February 2nd. I feel like he'll be there. They'll probably bring guys in that Saturday like they've been doing every Saturday, and I'm sure Auburn will line it up where KJ Lacey is there with Ryan Williams. So just wanted to touch on that one real quick. Also, definitely need to make sure this chat comes up to the front. Dookie, can't you see sometimes your scoops just hypnotize me? Might be the best YouTube comment we've gotten on here during the live stream. That's definitely one of my favorites. So shout out to Brian for that. Someone in the chat talking about Kane Womack. I think Alabama just zeroed in on him and is going to hire him as the defensive coordinator. But anything else that we really missed? I don't think so. I think we've touched on most everything.
We didn't talk a whole lot about, and I think maybe let's just do 2 or 3 minutes on the All-Star game and kind of just some quick evals. Christian, obviously you were in Orlando. Cam Coleman, one of the stars there. Not a surprise. Yep. We've watched him enough. That is absolutely not a surprise to anyone. Our time in San Antonio, Walker White, we've seen Walker White. We watched him play. We talked to him, heard about him. I was really impressed by the way he handled himself in an all-star game setting at quarterback. Physically, the guy's right there and ready to go. I think he's a guy that has an opportunity to come in and compete right away. Now, he's a true freshman, but he's on campus. Christian, we saw some fun guys. I don't know that anybody impressed me more than DeAndre Carter in their all-star game. He won't have to play as a true freshman offensive lineman. He was not in early. But DeAndre Carter is a football player that when he gets at Auburn in his strength and conditioning program and kind of trims down, I think he's going to be a superstar offensive lineman for Auburn.
Yes, absolutely. Jason, you had the story, talked with some of his teammates out there at Mater Dei. I think one of my favorite quotes of all time was his defensive line teammate, who's obviously been going up against him in practice, Aiden Breland, a 5-star who signed with Oregon. He said that he's just a big dancing bear. And you can take that however you want, but it was a great quote. And his running back talked about him very highly as well. Someone in the chat, is Carter a tackle or guard? He's a guard in college, definitely. He played tackle in the game, but he's a guard. I think
it'd be similar to a guy like Dylan Wade, where you go like down the line, if you had to have him play tackle, I think it'd be fine. He played tackle out there against the best of the best and more than held his own. I think he's more of a classic, right guard. I'll tell you, and I've said it, there's 2 guys he reminds me of with Auburn ties. The first one's Mike Berry. He reminds me of Mike Berry in that if you look at Mike Berry, you go, I don't know. I mean, he's big. He looks good. And then you put him on the field and you go, holy cow, that guy's really athletic. Same thing. And the other one is Tyrone Green. Now, Tyrone Green had a little bit longer arms, wasn't as tall, but Tyrone Green, when he sunk down and got his hands on somebody, he was over with. That's who DeAndre Carter is. You're like, man, if he gets his hands on the guy, it's lights out, game over. And those are 2 guys that turned out to be pretty good guys at the guard position for Auburn. So that's kind of a couple of comparisons for me for him.
Hey, Jason, man, God bless his soul, but at this age, who would you think weighed more, him or Monrico Crittenden?
I remember Monrico in high school. Monrico was probably a little bigger.
Okay.
Monrico was a guy that was probably 350, 355, something like that. Mm-hmm. And never could get it over the hump, back down. I've lived it my whole life. I understand it is really difficult. It's fun. It's not funny, but it is almost, I would say it's 90%, 95%. The guys that come in that have to gain weight when they get done on especially offensive line, you have to bulk up and you have to do all you can to weigh 300 pounds. 5 years later, those guys weigh 225 because all of a sudden they're not eating like they were, but they're still living, their metabolism's still there. On the other side, the guys that have to try to hold the weight down and do that, normally they just get bigger and bigger because all of a sudden they're not moving as much as they were before. It's an unfortunate part of life, but yeah, I think Monrico was a little bit bigger than DeAndre, probably a little bit taller too, but he was a little bit bigger, but probably a little bit different body style too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other guys in San Antonio, Kensley Foston had a pretty good week. We talked to some of the guys that were around him, and they spoke really highly of him. Unfortunately, the only one-on-one rep we got to see of Kensley going on in practice, he got matched up. Obviously, Kensley's a free safety. He got matched up against Jeremiah Smith, who's the number one player in the country. And we figured out why he's the number one player in the country. It didn't take very long to identify that. Imagine Cam Coleman at about 25, 30 pounds, maybe a little worse ball skills in terms of identifying it in the air, but a lot twitchier.
He's a running back style twitch, but a guy that's 6'3", 225 playing wide receiver. I think Ohio State, this guy's a freshman All-American next year. I mean, they got one receiver coming back. He's absolutely going to be a guy that's going to be on the field right away, in my opinion. But yeah, he was fun. We need to mention our
Amaris Williams.
Yes, he was really good. Exceptional athlete, quick, explosive, already on campus. Amaris Williams will play as a true freshman, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then the last one in San Antonio was DeMarcus Riddick. His athleticism always stands out at the linebacker position. He tipped a pass in the game, which led to an interception. And the other thing that stuck out to me, too, was he sprained his thumb really early in the week. When we talked with the head coach of the East team, and he said, look, in these all-star games, a lot of guys, even something as small as that, they're done for the week. They're calling it a day. DeMarcus had just left Auburn Bowl practice to come out there. He just gets it taped up, and he goes right back out there to practice and to have fun and go and play. So that was something that was noteworthy to me. So a fun couple weeks out there on the road. Glad to be back. Glad to be back here on the show. Dukes, any final thoughts from you before we close it out?
No, man, everybody just be careful with all this crazy weather coming, right?
Yes. Make sure you drip your faucets. I can tell you that coming from Montana, this is my kind of weather now. I've been prepared for these days, but y'all make sure to stay safe out there. Stay warm tomorrow. We will catch you guys. We'll do something again next week. Not sure exactly when, but we'll definitely do something. Last second question in the chat from Orion. Is Perry Thompson an early enrollee? No, he is not. He will be here in May or June whenever those guys report. It's him, DeAndre Carter, Amon Lane Gaines, and Malcolm Simmons, the four guys. And Dimitri Nicholas, if he signs, would be five that will enroll in the summer.
Yep. Everybody else already here. Everybody else here.
And go through workouts.
Here in classes, learning how to ride their scooters for the first time. We got to watch scooter practice the other day with Cam Coleman and Dylan Gentry, the two Phoenix City kids who got in their scooters, and now they were practicing, so they were zipping up and down the parking lot a few times. So hey, everybody stay safe on your scooters for your young freshmen now in college.
Yeah, there you go. So we will catch you guys again next week. Really appreciate everyone that was here live and asking questions in the chat. That makes a lot of fun. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube, make sure to do that down below. Totally free. Doesn't cost you anything. If you're listening to this later as a podcast, appreciate it. We would love a good review if you enjoyed it. And we will catch you guys next week for another episode.